Welcome back to Good Morning Colorado on this Saturday morning, 6:43 a.m. As you take a look at a really foggy look outside. I believe that's is that Pueblo? Is that the Steel City? Yes, it is, via our Viera wireless camera. And you know, one thing that makes this incoming winter storm remarkable, Marty, is that it was 2 years ago to the date that bomb cyclone nailed us here in southern Colorado. Now, we're not looking at that today. We don't want to cause any panic, but just very interesting that March seems to be that month we see some really wacky weather.
We do, you're right. And Josh is pointing out a storm that produced a whole bunch of wind and some decent amounts of snow. We'll get some decent amounts of snow with us. We won't have nearly that kind of wind. So at least in that regard, it won't be that impactful from this particular storm. Right now, we have some freezing fog up around the Greater Woodland Park Chamber of Commerce and Visitor Center. It's icing up the trees a little bit. Your cars, if you've left them outside, you're going to need to scrape them and make sure you get the windshields warmed up before you try to drive around, or it's going to be kind of tough to see. Temperatures right now at lower elevations anyway are generally in the 30s, so around or above freezing, which is helpful. Does keep the roadways from getting iced up. Of course, once you get up across the high country, things are colder. We have teens there, but we're generally in the 20s around Teller County right now. And highs today aren't going to be all that high. 30s to around 40 should do it for most of eastern Colorado. Could be a little warmer over the southeastern corner of the state, where we might even have some thunderstorms capable of producing some hail or some gusty wind. And Futurecast shows that as some of the really bright red that you see here shifting up generally through Baca and Prowers counties. In the meantime, as this first wave comes north, we're going to see precipitation expand very quickly later on this morning into early this afternoon along the Front Range. And I do think with any heavier bursts of precipitation, most of this is coming down as snow. Wet snow, sure, but snow nonetheless. And that's probably even true in Pueblo, where we're trying to get some suggestions of some rain here, but I think you'll turn that over to wet snow as well. These waves will continue to move off towards the north. This is what I would call phase 2 of the storm. We're still on the warm side of the storm, relatively speaking, so it's a wet snow. There's not a ton of wind with it, but it can come down pretty hard and be real pretty. Right here along the Colorado-Kansas state line, we'll have to watch for severe storms. Most of that probably ends up on the other side of the state line. And by 1 o'clock this afternoon, it looks like, wow, we're getting some drier air. And then you notice as we move through the afternoon, things just kind of keep materializing. So it's kind of a ramp in the atmosphere where we have some lifting going on that keeps things going. So I think it'll be pretty steady throughout the afternoon hours, and probably into early this evening as well. So let's start with phase 1 accumulations of snow. Looking like on the order of maybe 3 to 6 inches around Colorado Springs up towards Denver. We could have some pockets of heavier snow on the higher terrain, which I'll talk about in a little bit. I don't think the snow will be as heavy over the higher terrain south and west of Pueblo or along the Arkansas River, but maybe 1 to 3 inches on mainly the cooler surfaces, especially as you get west of Pueblo, would be reasonable. As we move into tonight, we start to transition to the backside of the storm system. As we do so, you'll start to see kind of a swirl in the clouds. What we don't know is if we'll keep the snow going consistently at lower elevations around Colorado Springs or Pueblo through the night. Typically, when you have a storm like this, you get the downslope effect that kind of shuts things down. But with the circulation being right overhead, we have some instability in the atmosphere, and so we could keep at least some intermittent bursts of snow going through the night. And that'll go a long way towards determining how heavy the snow is in both of our major population centers. I do think that we'll probably see the snow remain more steady and consistent on the higher terrain surrounding both communities, and that's one of the reasons we think we'll have heavier snowfall by tomorrow morning on the Palmer Divide and in parts of Teller County. And notice that at least through tomorrow morning, most of the heavier snow does look in this model to occur to the north and northeast of Colorado Springs, where we could see upwards of a foot across parts of the Palmer Divide. We'll probably end up with somewhere between 4 and 8 inches across Colorado Springs, heaviest as you get to the north. Notice Teller County not showing heavy precipitation amounts compared to the Palmer Divide, and that does look to be the case, at least initially with this storm, but it's not done at 6 o'clock tomorrow morning. So while the first wave may produce some heavier snow a little bit farther to the east, I think as we wrap this around tomorrow, you'll start to see these numbers come up. One other area that doesn't show up well here, I think we'll have a small ribbon of heavy snow banked right up against the eastern slopes of the mountains thanks to the easterly wind working with the terrain. So a place like Cascade, for example, could be up to around 10 inches to a foot as well. Again, much lesser amounts through tomorrow morning along the Arkansas River, but maybe 1 to 4 inches from Pueblo westward through about Penrose. Canyon City could pick up a little more. I wouldn't get too caught up in these little holes that you see. That's a guess on the model's part. And we'll probably end up with some heavier amounts over the higher terrain south and west of Pueblo, maybe 3 to 6 inches around Rye and Beulah, 1 to 4 inches from Walsenburg through Trinidad, some heavier amounts back towards La Vita Pass and Cuchara by the time we get through tomorrow morning. When you wake up, it will be colder tomorrow morning, 20s and 30s, so any snow falling will have a better likelihood to stick to roadways, and some of the wet or slushy roadways we may have today may have iced up some tonight. So watch for some slick travel there and expect the wind to be on the increase late tonight too. So we could start to see some blowing snow in areas, and that could also complicate travel. Again, right now it's just kind of foggy, drizzly at Highway 115 in Turkey Creek. We'll track the backside of that storm system for tomorrow. That's going to bring more snow to some areas, and the week as a whole looks cooler than it was last week, and we'll talk about that in our extended forecast soon. Be right back after the break.